I think I'm a special one.
People do not want to hear how a rugby player is going to be the solution to all of Chelsea's problems. How about better footballers? How about more experienced heads in the dressing room who have had a past of winning things at the top level? Welcome back to Son of Chelsea. Daniel Childs here. Hope you're doing really well on this Monday. Welcome to the very first episode of Beyond the Spin, a new news-focused series I'm doing on the channel and the podcast where, as it says on the tin, we're going to look to get beyond the spin, beyond what the briefing is trying to indicate and what is actually going on behind the scenes at Chelsea. Please do like, subscribe if you want to follow the series. We're going to be looking firstly today on two topics really. One of them is a story that's already raised a lot of eyebrows following the weekend's defeat, where a lot of the focus should be on improving the football team and question marks over how this is actually going to improve the football team. And also our good old friend, I guess I'd call it, Joao Felix, who already is settling into life at AC Milan. He's found another new home and kind of busting the myth of Joao Felix. I have a bit to say there. So this story came out from the Mail, others reported it too, that Willie Issa is a name you probably have never heard about unless you are a Rugby League fan. I am not a rugby fan, so I don't have any idea who this is. But the report is that Issa is to swap sports to become a player support and development officer at Stamford Bridge and will have a broad range of responsibilities. The report says that the 36-year-old back rower, who has won 3 Super League titles and a World Club Challenge with Wigan, is known for his leadership skills and has been a role model over a decade with the Cherry and Whites. Apparently, he will work closely with the head of men's operations and welfare, Kevin Campello, and his time will be dedicated largely to player coordination around training and match days, with his new employer committed to growing support for its players across all teams. Now, there is a very football man-esque response to this. What in the hell can a rugby player do to improve Chelsea and to improve a football team? What has that got to do with making a football team better? Now, there is, as always, a little bit of nuance within this, like the idea that you can't learn anything from other sports or other professions and there isn't some similarities with sports people is obviously silly. Like, there is some crossover. Not only do a lot of athletes you find play different sports when they were younger, so may have played the sport that they're now working in, or just like psychology-wise, it can be impactful. However, like at this current moment where we sit in February 2025, people do not want to hear how a rugby player is going to be the solution to all of Chelsea's problems. When I think of what could help Chelsea behind the scenes psychologically or kind of from an experience point of view, where what does this, if you ask the question to yourself right now, what do Chelsea lack? What are Chelsea missing? And I think Chelsea fans emotionally will think back to a mentality issue and think that there were players in the past that we had. There was a certain leadership and culture that has clearly been eroded and completely lost in recent years. And you have to ask why, if you're bringing someone in to be head of men's operations and welfare, you wouldn't be looking at ex-winners at Chelsea. If only we could look at a generation of Chelsea players in the past who were responsible, who were involved in a winning culture that got through a lot of adversity, a lot of pressure, a lot of chaos behind the scenes in the Abramovich era, but helped the club lift some of the biggest titles and achieve some of the biggest things this club has ever and may ever achieve once again. When you have all of those people and that institutional knowledge, I think that would be viewed much more positively than this. Because what this is, to me, is window dressing. It's design and it's kind of a facade of actually improving things. I'm not saying that Willie Issa can't provide anything positive. There's nothing about his mentality that couldn't give some good advice to players. I'm not suggesting there's nothing he can do. But in terms of priorities and in terms of what this is being signaled to at the moment, it's trying to give the impression of serious action when actually it's not doing much at all. What would be, I think, more impactful is one of two things. Either you bring in one of those ex-players who I kind of wonder their institutional knowledge returning to the club would actually be in conflict with Clear Lake, because you do think very quickly they maybe would look round the current environment at Chelsea Football Club and ask what the hell is going on compared to when they were in the dressing room, when they were around the club and around that culture before, which is maybe why they don't want previous institutional knowledge, because this ownership has consistently talked down the Abramovich era, which is something, I and many others have criticised and doubted how smart that is. So there's absolutely that. But you have to also ask, if you're talking about experience, if you're talking about a psychology that can impact the dressing room, how about better footballers? How about more experienced heads in the dressing room who have had a past of winning things at the top level? I'm not even talking about, you bring back ex-players. That's one part of it. But I'm actually talking about players who could impact things on the pitch right now. Players that have led or been a part of a team full of leaders. Couldn't that positively impact your dressing room at the moment? Because those players have been there, seen it, done it. We saw very recently the impact that Thiago Silva had on younger defenders and younger peers around him, even to a lesser extent, but I still think is a valuable name I will consistently bring up, because he didn't cost the world, but he proved to be a really good experienced head within our dressing room for several coaches, and that was Olivier Giroud. Those type of players can be worth their weight in gold over the course of a season. There is no one in that current dressing room that brings that. So I think there is clear ability, I think, or clear strategy behind the scenes to kind of brief that this is a serious football institution. But I think it's very telling that to make that act, you're bringing in someone who has no prior experience with Chelsea, who probably won't internally challenge you in the way maybe a Janobi Mikel, just to pull out a name there, or someone in the past would at a similar level if they were given a similar responsibility. So I think that's telling. I want to pull out some stats here, right? Because I have seen some chatter about how Chelsea fans are maybe entitled and are probably too privileged and probably expect the world and have been conditioned to expect success all the time, and that's unrealistic. But I consistently go back that the numbers around this ownership have to be put into context, and why their own actions have led people to expect something. Not even expect the quadruple, just expect some level of competency. And TNT reported and brought out the facts here. Chelsea are yet to win a trophy under the new ownership that took control of the club in 2022. They've spent £1.1 billion and made 39 permanent signings during this time. If you look at the personnel behind the scenes, on the pitch, in the dugout, it is all brand new. It is, with the exception of very few names, some of those the likes of Reece James and Trevor Chalobah, who were here before this ownership took him and came in and changed a lot. Institutionally, it is a radically different club, even at the academy level. Obviously, in the managerial sense, in the sporting directors, we didn't really have any sporting directors before. The closest to that was Marina Granovskaya, who obviously played a very different role. But, given the need for a sporting director, you kind of look at the way these sporting directors are acting versus Marina, who I had criticisms of, who wasn't a sporting director, but seemed to actually do a lot better in terms of transfer negotiations compared to Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart. But another point here is, again, Chelsea are still spending a lot. It's not like Chelsea and this ownership walked in and have not competed in the market at all, have not acted in the market. That is simply ludicrous. So again, that is logically how people go from point A to B of expecting things. Nazar Kinsella pointed out that Chelsea have topped the CIES football list, which is kind of a business list of looking at the transfer volume for the 24-25 season, which is the values of deals in and out, totaling around 481 million euros. Chelsea are fifth in the net spend at around 139 million euros, second on gross spend at 310 million euros, and fifth in fees received at 171 million euros, totaling 481 million in and out. So again, Chelsea are being very active in the market. They still are spending some substantial amounts, which is why people are looking at, even if we are spending smaller fees and we aren't spending as much in wages, we still are spending, we still are being active. So it poses that question again in terms of how have Chelsea still got major flaws within their squad currently, and it's impacting obviously Enzo Maresca and the team's form since mid-December. One thing I don't think is negatively impacting Chelsea right now is the is the loaning out of Joao Felix. Now, maybe you could argue from a pure body depth point of view, it can. But I don't believe, as this headline I'm about to show you, Chelsea did not lose the game on Saturday because Joao Felix wasn't present. I'm just not buying that argument. Pete Rutzler at the time reporting or kind of giving his opinion, but then there is some information in here in terms of Chelsea behind the scenes. Toothless Chelsea may regret letting Joao Felix leave, with Jackson and Guiu injured and Christopher Nkunku struggling. The FA Cup exit against Brighton showed Enzo Maresca's team looked light in attack. In this piece, there's chatter that Chelsea gave good thought to recruiting a forward or a left winger. They held concrete interest in Garnacho, Gittins, Tell. Ultimately, they decided to wait for the summer as they did not see good value options available to improve on what they already have without hindering others' development. We know pretty clearly that Chelsea did some action in January. Even if a deal didn't come to fruition, there were definitely advances towards players. We knew this throughout the window. Tell was one of those. Gittins was one of those. Garnacho was definitely one of those. So the idea that Chelsea just looked at the market and didn't see anything worth jumping for doesn't quite tell the whole story. There are reports, whether you believe them or not, that players rejected Chelsea's advances. Tell did make a move in the end. He made a move to Spurs. Now, at the time, I believe from a football point of view, Tell is not exactly what Chelsea require. What they require is a high-level calibre, at least strong rotational option for centre forward. But it shows that those players were willing to at least make a move. So Chelsea were obviously active in the transfer window. So again, it's why people aren't really buying that Chelsea came out of that window, and as we spoke about last week on the show, on one of my shows, that suddenly this is all the plan. That Chelsea not doing anything in January was part of the master plan, always part of the plan. Again, one of the things we're going to look at this show, unless things radically changing it better, is you'll notice that whatever has happened has been part of the plan, whether logically and just in terms of a sequence of events. There are things 2-3 weeks ago that completely contradict what is being said now, something you need to pay attention to. But I don't agree that Joao Felix leaving is some massive oversight from Chelsea's point of view. Again, pure just based on bodies, but again, Tyreek George could take that place. Joao Felix is a bit of a myth as a player. I've consistently said this. I don't think he's ever lived up to the hype that has, I think, been unworthy of his reputation. I don't quite get how Joao Felix can go through multiple seasons now of never coming close to what he did originally at Benfica, or even what his greatest admirers claim he can do, and it's still being sold that Joao Felix is some great player that is worthy of more time. Joao Felix should have never been signed for Chelsea. The idea that Chelsea went in there and let their best midfielder go in service of signing Joao Felix to get a deal over the line was incompetent squad building, because right now people are looking at Chelsea central midfield and wondering, why do we have no midfield depth? Well, it doesn't kind of help when you let your best midfielder leave and you sign a player you probably don't need in the first place. Not even looking at Joao Felix's flaws as a player, his inability to, I think, seriously impact games when it isn't against the likes of Noah and Shamrock Rovers. That is something you have to take into account. And I think that undeniably it gets back to a bigger issue here of what is Chelsea's priority in terms of squad building. But Nazar Kinsella was reporting quite recently that the Joao Felix Conor Gallagher exchange was more of an accounting PSR exercise, which we all kind of knew at the time, rather than a move that was meant to radically improve our first team. I think that was transparent, but has only been clear in the month since. And Joao Felix is already saying, after only a couple of games at AC Milan, he feels at home. You know, this is a great place for him. He's obviously already scored a goal or two. He did similar at Chelsea when he started his career, but his overall average of performances, I think, were always underwhelming at least, and at times really, really poor. I think that will probably even itself out at AC Milan as well, in a less quality league than the Premier League for sure. But it leaves Chelsea in a messy situation, because I don't think AC Milan will maybe have the desire or the finances in the summer to sign Joao Felix permanently. At least from where we sit currently, we know AC Milan and specifically Serie A clubs have a real difficulty spending the sort of money that gets players out of the Premier League, because the wages and the level of finance in the Premier League is obviously so vastly different, and that's what makes it difficult to offload players you don't want to leagues like Serie A. So one to look at for the summer. And it's a mess that Chelsea have created now, where they probably don't want this player for the long term. If they can sell him, great. But who is going to buy him in the summer, especially if between now and the summer Joao Felix does not pull up any tree significantly at the San Siro? He may do, and I think that would be a good situation for Chelsea to maybe get some sort of a fee. But the idea that he is already out the door, not even a full season at Chelsea, I think tells you how silly that move was in the first place. But also, undercuts the idea of what Chelsea's transfer plan is. When we just looked at recruiting forwards and there isn't good options in the market, you've always got to go back to the first principle of, well, is it really about improving the first team, or is it kind of to do what you did with Joao Felix, which is a transaction that financially benefits you some way in a kind of an accounting and spreadsheet trick, which then maybe costs you again 5 months down the line when you have to loan out those players because they weren't good enough for you in the first place. So those are the things today, and I think the key theme of today's show, Beyond the Spin, is how Chelsea's actions, or kind of the discussions that are happening in some ways, are kind of irrelevant to the bigger picture at Chelsea. A rugby guy coming in is obviously not going to solve the bigger issues at Chelsea. Joao Felix is not the be-all and end-all to Chelsea's problems. There is a lot more that we can discuss. There is a lot more that people, I think, rightly are looking at the moment, and it leads back to the key decision makers at the top. So that is it for today's edition of Beyond the Spin. Let me know what you think of it. It's a little bit like my old show, Let's Talk Chelsea. We're going to be looking at the news, but I really want to dissect, and maybe we'll get guests on here to talk about this as well, and kind of break down these stories and kind of think about the briefings, because the briefings have become very regular at Chelsea. And what do they mean? What are they trying to indicate? And what is the truth behind it? I think that is kind of the aim behind this show. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Follow me across the socials at SonOfChelsea, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.